Welcome to our presentation, Critically Analyzing Why is Productivity Slowing Down by Golden, Kutrompis, Lafon, and Winkler. Our report consists of a panel discussing the essential findings and aspects of the paper which we found interesting. This will be succeeded by analyzing how it relates to the EC1B3 course, focusing on the Romer model and critically evaluating it through our theories. We will then conclude the presentation with a policy suggestion addressing the slowdown. So let's get right into it, discussing some summaries of the main aspects of competition, weak investment, global trade, and discrimination.
So, business dynamism is the creation and destruction of firms and the reallocation of resources. The idea refers to how new firms are typically more productive than older ones since they have just entered the market and need to survive through lower costs, waste, and being more allocatively efficient. However, dynamism has recently declined in many advanced economies with less creation and lower labour market fluidity. The declining levels of business dynamism are likely rooted in the market power of firms nowadays, whereby firms can set higher prices due to low competition, especially in advanced economies. This has adverse effects on productivity growth and can be seen by a lack of incentives to be innovative and invest in productivity enhancing technology, reduce competitive pressure on firms to adopt practices like cost cutting and being allocatively efficient and rent-seeking behaviour.
Other reasons for a fall in business dynamism are what the article refers to as superstar firms and zombie firms. Superstar firms dominate industries due to high profit margins, allowing them to control industries. Zombies, in contrast, are firms that cannot cover their debt servicing costs with their operating profits. Still, they are unlikely to exit the market because they can keep borrowing from banks, inhibiting productivity growth. Zombie firms have become more prevalent in advanced economies, and studies state that the share of zombie firms in public companies increased from 4% in the 1980s to 17% in 2020. This is bad for productivity growth, as less investment in technology means firms focus more on servicing debts.
Weak investment also depressed productivity growth by lowering the level of capital deepening, which increases the units of capital per worker in the economy and is crucial to improving labor productivity. This can be split into cyclical and structural causes. Firstly, the crisis increased financial friction. Harsher credit conditions induced by the crisis resulted in a lack of R&D investment, which restricted TFP growth. However, credit friction became less of a critical determinant of TFP growth following the crisis. The second impact was lower aggregate demand. As demand slumped, the growth rate of investment fell, responsible for approximately half of the lower contribution of capital to labor productivity growth. Finally, the crisis led to a fall in government investment by 20% as a share of GDP. Nonetheless, these cyclical factors do not fully explain the fall in investment, as investment was slowing even before the crisis. So, other structural factors are causing the productivity slowdown.
One of these structural factors is the rise of intangible capital. Intangible capital often has large spillover effects on the TFP because of its non-rivalry and non-excludability of knowledge. This means changes in the level of intangible capital disproportionately impacts the growth rate of the TFP. In the US, roughly 28% of the TFP slowdown was attributable to the decline in intangible capital services. Weakening competition is another structural factor.
It is believed that competitive standards have dropped in the US and Europe over recent decades. As competition decreases, firms may gain monopoly power over the market, thus dictating output levels and reducing the incentive to invest. Corporate governance practices also play a role in the recent lack of investment. Many managers have become fixated on short-termism as they are judged on short-term performance. This reduces the incentive to push for long-term investments, which boosts productivity. Overall, insufficient investment is a primary driver of the productivity slowdown and has been caused by both cyclical and structural factors.
Historically, trade had a critical role in driving productivity growth gains. International trade increased world allocative efficiency and productivity through greater international competition and access to higher quality and cheaper capital goods. However, lower investment following the 2008 financial crisis and weak consumer demand led to a slowdown in global trade. This slowdown in trade is a possible contributing factor to lower productivity, as we saw gains from trade fell between 1996 to 2005 and from 2006 to 2017. The article also discusses how the emergence of China as a major exporter, technological advancements, and expanding global value chains increase trade growth. However, it's very much possible most of the gains from trade have already been reaped.
Another interesting aspect discussed is reduced discrimination from the 1960s onwards, positively affecting productivity. As more women and people of colour entered skilled professions, its importance was reflected by a 20 to 40% increase in the market output per person from the 1960s to the 2010s. Thus, lower levels of discrimination since 2010 are a possible contributing factor to a productivity slowdown, given its quantitative significance from the 60s to the 10s. We can relate the findings in this case study to the concepts discussed in EC1B3. The total factor of productivity is crucial in determining the efficiency of the inputs used in production, and it accounts for the residual addition to output growth, which is not accounted for by changes in input quantity. TFP growth is a crucial driver of long-term economic growth because it represents advances in technology, innovation, and organizational practices that allow firms to produce more output with the same level of inputs. This report finds that mismeasurement, falling capital rates, global trade, and intangibles contribute to the productivity slowdown caused by the TFP and capital deepening.
The Raymond model emphasizes the role knowledge and technology has in driving economic growth in the long term. An assumption we made in this course is that knowledge is a non-rivalrous resource, meaning one person's use does not decrease the amount for others. So as a result, global trade plays a vital role in the Raymond model. The transfer of knowledge and technologies across borders leads to greater efficiency and productivity gains, which drives long-term economic growth as countries specialize and form competitive advantages.
Relating this to the article's discussion of lower global trade indicates lower productivity growth because of the reduced cross-border knowledge and technological spillovers. Lower international trade also decreases firms' incentives to engage in R&D, another critical innovation driver. Lower levels of discrimination also led to a greater pool of talented individuals who can contribute towards innovative and technological advancements, positively affecting the accumulation of knowledge and innovation. Weak investment and capital deepening mean there is likely to be a lack of new ideas and technology, which, according to the model, is crucial for long-term economic growth and the TFP.
The idea of a steady state in the Roman model aligns with the article, possibly indicating that a slowdown in productivity in recent years is due to these countries nearing the steady state, especially in advanced economies. The logarithmic investment curve shows TFP slows down when reaching its crossover point with the depreciation of capital curve. This concept could be explained by the factors outlined in the article, but some queries arise. Whilst the Roman model is useful for understanding how countries develop, it has several limitations. With the current available quantitative research, there is no evidence to suggest that a steady state does or will exist. Moreover, since no economy has reached such a state, it is impossible to tell whether depreciation and productivity growth is directly rooted in nearing the steady state. The Roman model does also not take into account any social factors like discrimination, which hinders innovation and productivity. This means the changing levels of discrimination were not reflected in how it increased the pool of skilled workers and increased innovation to a certain degree until it started to plateau.
To conclude, we have analyzed 4 critical sections of the report: competition, weak investment, global trade, and discrimination. While these sections of the paper have some merit in explaining the causes behind the slowdown, they have limitations. In particular, it lacks a thorough analysis of long-term stability and overlooks the implications of the COVID pandemic. Furthermore, the study does not provide feasible answers to the identified problems and employs multiple theoretical frameworks, which reduces accuracy and credibility. Furthermore, the inability to generate quantitative estimates for all variables contributing to the economic slowdown limits the scope and depth of the study. As a result, these limitations must be considered when interpreting the findings and developing any practical strategies or policies. Thank you.